My name's Tom McDonald. I'm 94 years of age. I've been a union and political activist for 75 years. I was a union official for 41 years, including being the National Secretary of my union, the Building Workers Industrial Union, and for a period I was a Vice President of the ACTU. I come from a family of 10 children. We lived in two-bedroom a terrace house in Glebe, and we did it tough because we were rare during the Great Depression. So I know what poverty is, but I also know what greed is. So one of my greatest hates is people that are greedy. Money has never been my God. My God is my principles and my values. I became a socialist when I was still a teenager, and a communist soon after. And as I said, I became a trade union leader and a Marxist. The events that shaped my politics were 2 world wars, and I thought they were acts of madness. Tens of millions of people were killed, economies were wrecked, cities were destroyed, people's lives were ruined, they lost everything they had. So I thought if that was capitalism, there had to be something better. And that set me thinking about socialism. The second event was the Great Depression, and I thought, here we have a third of the workforce unemployed, but they're not allowed to work to create the things they need. And I thought, that's not a good system. Why can't they work and create what they need to live on? So that, again, sort of took me from being neutral to a position of a further step down the road to becoming a socialist. When I started my apprenticeship, I had 2 carpenters to teach me my trade, but they were both socialist, a couple of old Scotchmen. So they not only taught me my trade, they taught me some of my socialist understandings. And they were students of the Soviet Union, so they told me about how the Soviet Union had come from the revolution in 1917, where most of the population was illiterate, where there was widespread poverty and unemployment, etc., to where it had come at the time of the Second World War. And there'd been some remarkable achievements: free education, electrification of the whole nation, jobs for people, free health system, and a modern transport system. So I thought, this is for me. I want Australia to be like that. I become a militant unionist because I had a bad boss. he refused to teach us, give us work that allowed us to learn our trade. It was in the year about 1942. I was about in my second year of my apprenticeship. And it's interesting that at that time, the apprenticeship paper says that the employer was the master and the apprentice was the servant. They were the words. And the employer acted in that way, but I was not going to be anyone's servant. So we had this fundamental difference, whether I had rights or whether the employer had total rights. So I organised a strike of the apprentices. We had a sit-down strike and we said, we're not going to work doing mundane work. Give us work where we can learn our trade, or we're not going to do anything. We beat the boss, so I learnt that strikes is a way of winning. I met, as a result of that strike, my mentor, Pat Clancy, who was an official of the union, and that led to him being my mentor for a period of the rest of his life, which is a bit over 40 years. And as he advanced through the union and talked me into becoming an official, I was his deputy. And we worked together, closely together, for all that period. And he was a communist and I admired him. But I also met a lot of other communists through the party organisation and meetings and rallies. Now, one of the people that influenced me, who was a communist, was a man called Tom McDonald. He used to speak every Sunday, or most Sundays, down the Domain. He was known as the boy orator. He was very young. He was the local bootmaker. So when I found this out, I found out also that he had been the leader of the unemployment movement. And he'd been arrested many times. And what the unemployment movement did, when the landlord evicted the workers, working family, and all their furniture out onto the streets, they would come around and put all the furniture back, and they'd change all the locks, put new locks on. So in fact, the only ones that had the keys to the house were the family. So they locked the employer, the landlord out. So I thought he was a wonderful man, and he was one example of a whole range of people who inspired me. I admired them because of their principles, because of their commitments, because of their ability. During all this process, which wasn't quite black and white, they developed my understanding of how capitalism worked and the limitations of capitalism. And over time, they taught me how to build power and how to use power and why you should not abuse power. They taught me how to use Marx's system of analysis, which I mastered pretty well, I must say. And just about everything I did from those early days was to analyse everything. I did a meeting of building workers on a very complex political issue. Can't remember exactly what it was, might have been during the anti-Communist Party, and I was taking the Daily Telegraph's arguments and the employers' arguments and the Liberal Party's arguments, and I was setting to dismantle them one after the other. And I thought I was going well. And a worker got up and said, "Hey, Tom, we've heard enough. All we want you to do is to tell us what you're on about, and we will tell you whether we support you." So I thought about what he was saying. Now, my first reaction was he was saying, "I'm talking too long." But Marxism taught me to think more deeply. And then I realised that what he was saying was, don't bury the substance of the argument in a lot of detail. And that greatly helped me in my approach to communications. And it lives with me today. The other one was we had a big strike in the building industry in 1971 that lasted 5 weeks. It was a dispute over the workers demanding full pay when off work injured. At the time they were only getting half pay as workers' compensation. So after about 5 weeks of dispute, the employers were bleeding, the workers were going through a financial crisis, and a situation arose where there was 2 choices for us to take in the strike, the leadership. One was to stay on strike and force the master builders to reach an agreement that all their members would take out workers' accident pay insurance that on top of workers' compensation would give them full pay. Now, the chances of success if they stayed on strike was probably 99%, almost certain we would win if they stayed out. The other proposition was that they go back to work and we allow the Industrial Relations Commission judge to decide the issue. Now, the second course, we were, because the industry was in such a crisis, we were pretty confident we'd win, but we were only about 90 to 95% certain. So when we analysed it, we came out with this view. If we adopt the first one, 99%, only the members of the master builders and their employees will get full pay. The other half of the industry who are not covered by employers, members of the master builders, they get nothing. Whereas the other way, if we succeeded, was 90 to 95%, everyone would get it. Everyone would get it because the award would be varied. Now, if we'd adopted the first course and won, half the workers would have got nothing. So it would have meant that they would have felt we'd sold them out because they all went out and they would expect they all go back together. We thought it was better if we failed than split the workers into 2 opposing groups when they went back to work, because the workers would never forgive us. So we adopted a class approach, not a union approach. The union approach was the 95% included all the big jobs. So the Communist Party taught me to think and analyse things from a class point of view, not from a union point of view, but from a class point of view which would embrace a union point of view as well. And I learnt the importance of strategical thinking and planning, and that was the road to victory, as they said. That the source of power of the workers was unity, solidarity, mateship and comradeship. I watched how some of those leaders that I admired worked, and when they did something I liked, I stole their idea. I adopted their approach. So part of a lot of people, communists are part of me. In 1951, Australia's system of democracy, capitalist system of democracy, was under threat. And the objective of the ultra-right wing of society was to destroy the left. And anti-communism was the vehicle to achieve that objective. So the Menzies government decided to outlaw the Communist Party of Australia, which would have meant that no communist could have been trade union leaders or leaders of community organisations, nor could their fellow travellers who were people that were regarded as undercover members of the Communist Party. And that would have effectively destroyed the left and strengthened the extreme right-wing forces. So the stakes were very high. So when the legislation was carried, several unions took the Menzies government to the High Court, and the High Court ruled that the legislation was unconstitutional. So Menzies then decided to have a referendum. At the point of the referendum, the atmosphere was a Cold War atmosphere. Soviet Union, who had been our friends, become the main enemy. And everything about the Soviet Union was bad through our capitalist medium. So the odds were heavily in favour of Menzies. But there were certain factors in our favour. Like in America, McCarthyism was on the march, and McCarthyism had the same objectives as the Menzies government did. And in America, that meant a lot of outstanding leaders in America in the area of art and history and culture and sport and labour movement, etc., were branded communist, and they lost their jobs. Like people like Paul Robeson couldn't get a job. That experience showed where it would all end in the demolishing of any left-wing progressive thinking forces. So what happened was the Communist Party organised its campaign against the legislation because it had to defend itself, and it had a good record to defend. Dr. Everett, who was the first president of the United Nations, he ran a great campaign on behalf of the Labor Party because he saw that the real issue was democracy. The left unions run their own campaign. I think the students ran their own campaign. And there are other progressive groups run their own campaign, academics and what have you. So a few things that were going in our favour. Here they are saying how evil the Soviet Union was, but that was 1951. The war had just ended, bloody 6 years before, when everyone was recognising the Soviet Union as the heroes of the world for beating fascism. So that was run in our favour. And when they were talking about getting rid of all these communists, a lot of them were leaders of trade unions. They had massive support from workers, like people like Jim Healy. They worshipped him down the waterfront. And they were active in the trade union movement, in the local government area, and in many areas. So the workers thought, if this goes through, we won't be able to elect our leaders. We'll finish up with right-wing leaders. So therefore, that became a positive factor in our favour. And so the prestige of left-wing led unions made up of Communist and left-wing Labor Party. Now, some of those left-wing Labor Party people were going to be branded as fellow travellers, and their position in leadership was put at question. Now, at the time, so they were some of the factors working in our favour. So how I got involved, I was a young union organiser, and a number of unions, quite a number of unions, appointed one of their officials, like my union, appointed me to be on campaign committee in various states. So our job was to distribute the no case throughout New South Wales. So the way we did it, we got masses of activists agreeing to take time off work, unpaid, paid, sick leave, etc., etc. But they took it off. So we had a small army of activists, committed, made up of militant unionists and not just communist and left-wing Labor Party forces. So the way we did it was we decided that we had a street directory, Gregory Street Directory, and we'd tear a couple of pages out and say to a group, a limited group of 4 or something, do every street on those 2 pages of the street directory, and letterbox every house and go into every small factory. The big factories and big workplaces were left to the unions to deal with. So that's what we did. So when we got to a small factory, we'd be in groups of 2. One would go in the front door of the factory to the office to try to talk the management into letting us distribute the leaflet, which they would not do. So they'd have an argument, the person would have an argument with them, the other one would go on the back door, distribute it, come to the front door and just signal to him it's been distributed, and the argument would end. And the employer would thought he had a victory. So we also distributed it through the train system. For example, we used to get say, thousands of copies of it, say at peak stations like Granville, Bankstown, Hornsby, out Hurstville Way, etc. And they drop them at the railway station. We would get a ticket, take a bundle of them, and go through the train, giving them out to everyone. When we got to Central, we'd get off and go up and get a stack from Central and get on the train out and then get on the train in. So we distributed a hell of a lot that way. And then we had people that were prepared to give their weekends, going out into the country areas, having meetings in the town, distributing it throughout the township, etc. And we had others that used to get on the trams. They used to, the guard, the ticket collector used to walk along the outside of the tram on a board, a walk board. So the trammies were union people on side, so they shut their eyes while the paper boy was going along giving out the Daily Telegraph. We were going out giving the no case. So that was the spirit, and you had in the workshops you had shop committees of left unions meetings, and we beat the bastards. It was a small majority, I think about 100,000, but we beat them. And democracy, an element of capitalist democracy, was preserved. There was a very mixed reaction. A lot of people had made up their mind. The media had made it up for them. So, but there were others, when we said this was about destroying the left, people sat up and thought. So we argued it on our terms. They argued anti-communist, we argued pro-left. So I remember at one stage of all this, I did a job meeting on the Communist Party Dissolution Bill, and I was as nervous as hell. It was a difficult issue, and I'd prepared myself, and I went out on the job and I made a speech. And towards the end of it, a bloke got up to comment. He said, "I think what you said is a lot of bullshit." So I said, "No, it's not," and I repeated my speech, because I'd learned it off by heart. So he got a double dip of that. The issue was big. People realised it, but people also realised that the Soviet Union wasn't such an evil force, because it only happened 6 years ago, but they had the heroes, etc. I think democracy is a big issue, always has been for the Australian people, because of our background, you know, our rebel pioneers coming out here, searching for gold, and our convict days, which developed part of our culture, and those factors worked in our favour.